Okay, boys and girls, today we are reading chapters 10 and 11 of Bud Not Buddy, and we're almost halfway through the book. In chapter 9, Bud spends an evening at the Flint Hooverville. The next morning, he and Bugs try to get on a train. Bugs makes it, but Bud doesn't quite make the train. So Bud has a suitcase, and he has just decided that since he wasn't able to go out west to California with Bugs, he's going to go to Grand Rapids, where he believes his father is playing in a band. And he's decided that he's going to walk all the way to Grand Rapids. Chapter 10. And Bud is walking. Oh, let me say. While we're reading this, take notes on things we know about Lefty Lewis, Bud's reactions to Lefty Lewis, and historical information. We're taking notes on historical information, Bud's reactions to Lefty Lewis, and information or things we find out about Lefty Lewis. Chapter 10, Bud is walking his way to Grand Rapids. Flint ended all of a sudden, and I was in the country. It was like one of those days that it's raining on one side of the street and not on the other. Here in Flint, here you have Flint and a sidewalk. You take one baby step, and here you have country and a dirt path. On the sidewalk side, a sign said, "You are now leaving Flint. Hurry back." And on the dirt path side, "You are now entering Flint. Enjoy your stay." I jumped in and out of Flint around 7 times before that got boring, and I decided I'd better head for Grand Rapids. It was already very, very dark, and unless things were different in the country, it wasn't going to be getting light anytime soon. 120 miles. It didn't take too much time before I figured out that 24 hours worth of walking was a lot longer than I thought it would be. I must have only been walking for a couple minutes when everything changed. First off, there were sounds. Flint could be pretty noisy, what with cars honking horns and trucks with no mufflers on 'em shifting gears and people yelling at each other so you couldn't tell if they were happy or about to bust out fighting. Out here in the country, the sounds were loud too, but what I was hearing was the sound of bugs and toady frogs and mice and rats playing a dangerous, scary kind of hide-and-go-seek where they rustle around and try to keep away from each other or try to find each other. Instead of being tagged and called it like the way human beings play the game, out here, the ones that got out, the ones that got ate up. Every step I took toward Grand Rapids, I could hear the sounds of mouse bones and bug skeletons getting busted up by the teeth of bigger things. Every once in a while, a couple of cats would give out the kind of howls and yowls that would make the hair on your neck jump up if you were a human being, and your heart turn into a little cup of shaky yellow custard if you were a mouse. I walked and walked and walked. Some of the time a car would come by and I'd have to duck into the bushes and wait till it had passed, so I don't think I was doing any 5 miles an hour. I felt like I'd been walking all night, but I'd only gone through 3 little towns. I was getting so tired that I started to forget to duck in the bushes when a car would roar by. Some of the time they'd see me and step on the brakes for a second, then speed off. Most times they never noticed me. Another car bounced over the top of a hill. The lights blinded me for a second, and then I ducked into the bushes again. The guy in the car stepped on his brakes to slow down, and I could see him twist his neck around. He stuck the car in reverse and pulled to a stop about 30 giant steps away from where I was hiding. His door opened and he stepped out and started walking slow toward my bushes. He brushed his hand over his head and put on a black hat, like the kind the police or some army men wear. But all the cops I'd ever seen were white, so I knew this guy must be a soldier. He stopped and put his fingers to his lips and whistled. The whistle was so loud that it made me duck down and put my hands over my ears. It felt like he'd blown it right inside my head. All the bugs and toady frogs shut right up. They quit chasing and biting each other, 'cause this had to be the loudest whistle they'd ever heard, too. Rocks were crunching as the man in the black hat walked a couple of steps up the road, then stopped again. For the second time he blasted my ears with that whistle. The noise-making critters in that patch of road got quiet. He said, "Say hey!" He waited, then yelled, "Say hey!" I know my eyes aren't what they used to be, but although I know they aren't so bad that they'd lie to me about seeing a young brown-skinned I know my eyes ain't what they used to be, but I know they aren't so bad that they'd lie to me about seeing a young brown-skinned boy walking along the side of the road just outside Alwaso, Michigan at 2:30 in the morning. I couldn't tell if he was talking to me or himself. I peeked up to see if I could get a better look at this man. He came closer to me, then stopped about 10 giant steps away. "And I'll tell you, I've seen some things out of place before, and a young brown-skinned boy walking along the road just outside of Alwaso, Michigan at 2:30 in the morning is definitely not where he ought to be. In fact, what is definite is that neither one of us should be out here this time of night." He squatted down and said, "Are you still there?" I raised my head a little higher to get a better look at him and his big car. He'd left the door open, and I could hear the engine of the car grumbling. It was saying, "Wugga, wugga, 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 wugga." "Son," he said, "this is no time to play. I don't know and I don't care why you're out here, but let me tell you I know you're a long way from home. Are you from Flint?" How could he tell I was from Flint just by seeing my face for a second in his headlights? I wonder how grown folks know so doggone much just by looking at ya. Something was telling me to answer him, but I still wanted to get a better look. He stood up. "You know what? I bet if I can't get you to come out with talk, I got something else that might make you show your face. From the quick look I got at you, you seemed a little on the puny side. I'll bet anything you're hungry. Just so happens that I've got a spare bologna and mustard sandwich and an apple in the car. You interested?" Shucks! How did he know I was so hungry? Then he said, "Might even have some extra red pop." Before my brain could stop it, my stomach made my mouth yell out, "But I don't like mustard, sir." The man could tell which bushes I was hiding in, but please, please don't key on me. He didn't bum rush them or try to get me. He just laughed and said, "Well, I didn't check, but I don't suppose the mustard's been glued on. I'll bet you we can scrape it off. What do you say?" I was carefully talking to him this time, so he couldn't track where I was. I turned my head and talked sideways out of my mouth, like one of those ventriloquists. "Just leave 'em at the side of the road and I'll get 'em. And please open the bottle of pop, sir. I don't have a bottle opener." He squatted back down and said, "Oh, no, can't do that. The deal is, I feed you, you show me your face." From the way the man talked, he seemed like he was okay, and before my brain could stop it, my stomach told the rest of me to slide my suitcase deeper in the weeds and walk out. The man stayed squatted down and said, "I knew I saw something. A deal's a deal, so I'll go get your food, all right." Yes, sir. He stood up, turned his back on me, then ducked inside the car. A second later, he came back with a brown paper bag and a big bottle of red pop. Here it is. He stood there, acting like I was going to have to come over to him and get it. Could you put 'em down and I'll eat 'em, and you just keep driving, sir? He laughed again. Thanks for your concern, but I've got a little time to spare. With him standing there in the dark, dangling the bottle of red pop out of his right hand, and the red tail lights of the car behind him shining through the bottle, it looked like the reddest red in the world. I walked right up to the man like I was hypnotized. I forgot all my manners and reached out. He raised the bottle over his head. Hold on now. Could I have some of the pop, sir? He smiled. That's not why I said hold on. I said it because we have some talking to do first. My eyes left the bottle and looked at the man. His hat wasn't a cop hat or a soldier hat. It was the kind of cap men wore who drive fancy cars for rich folks. And it wasn't black, it was red. He said, I've got a problem and I need you to help me figure it out. Uh-oh. What he just said is another one of Bud Caldwell's rules and things for having a funner life and making a better liar out of yourself. This was number 87. Rules and things, number 87. When an adult tells you they need your help with a problem, get ready to be tricked. Most times this means they just want you to go fetch something for them. The man said, My problem is I'm not quite as brave as you are. I'm feeling very, very uncomfortable standing on the side of the road just outside of Owasso, Michigan at 2:30 in the morning. The sooner you can put my mind at ease about what you're doing out here, the sooner we can both go about our business, okay? I nodded. He waited a second, then nodded too. I nodded back. He said, Well, I was too doggone tired and hungry to think up a good lie. Nothing, sir. He looked disappointed. What's your name, son? Bud, not Buddy, sir. Now there's an unusual name. Did you run away from home, Bud, not Buddy? I could tell this guy was poking fun at me, but I answered anyway. Yes, sir. Okay, that's a start. He handed me the bottle of red pop. He must have had it sitting in ice in the car. It was cold and sweet and delicious. After a couple of seconds, he pulled the bottle away from my mouth. Hold on, don't belt it all down on the first pull. There's plenty here. I slowed way down. Okay, Bud, you've run away from home. Where is that? I don't know if it was because the red pop juicing up my brain or because I'm such a good liar, but one of those things got me thinking again real quick. The first thing I knew was that no matter what I told him, this man wasn't going to let me stay out here all by myself. But the nervous way he kept looking around was making things seem so scary that not staying out here was okay. The second thing I knew was that I couldn't tell this man about the home or the Amoses. I wasn't about to let him take me back to either one of them. The man said, Where's home, Bud? Then another jolt of red pop must have pumped through my heart because my brain came up with a perfect lie. I ran away from Grand Rapids, sir. See how perfect the lie was? Maybe this guy would feel sorry for me and put me on a bus to Grand Rapids and I wouldn't have to do any more doggone walking. He must have some money. Anyone driving a car like this would have to be rich, or at least know somebody who was rich. The man scratched under the back of his hat and said, Grand Rapids. He said that like it was the most unbelievable thing in the world, like you'd need to put 6 exclamation points after it. Something about the way he said it made me nervous, but I answered him, Yes, sir. That's the bad thing about lying. Once you say one, you've usually got to stick with it." "Well, I'll be," the man said. "That's where I'm from. I left there not an hour and a half ago." He snatched the bottle out of my hand, grabbed my arm, walked me over to the passenger side of the car, and started to open the door. I was glad I was going to get a ride, but I said, "Sir, I left my suitcase over in the bushes. Can we please get it?" "See, my eyes aren't near as bad as I thought they were. I knew you had a box or something. But not, buddy, you don't know how lucky you are I came through here. Some of these Owasso folks used to have a sign hanging along here that said, and I'm going to clean up the language for you. It said, 'To our Negro friends who are passing through, kindly don't let the sun set down on your rear end in Owasso.'" He must not have trusted me, 'cause he kept hold of my arm. We went over to the bushes and I grabbed my suitcase. Then he walked me back to the car. When he opened the passenger side door, I could see there was a big box sitting in the front seat. The man never let go of my arm and wrestled the box over into the back seat. If he would have let my arm go just for 1 second, I would have run like the devil was chasing me. On the side of the box, some big red letters said as clear as anything, "Urgent, contains human blood." Oh man, here we go again. My heart started jumping around in my stomach. The only kind of people who would carry human blood around in a car were vampires. They must drink it if they were taking a long trip and couldn't find any people to get blood from. This guy figured he'd rather have my fresh blood than blood out of a bottle. I barely heard him say, "Get in. I'm going back to Grand Rapids tomorrow. I'll send a telegram to your folks and then take you back." Then he made his first mistake. He let go of my arm. I slid into the car and he closed the door behind me. Quick as anything, I locked the door and crawled over to the driver's side of the car and pulled that door closed and locked it just as the vampire reached for the handle to get in. I dug around in my pocket and pulled my knife out and put it under my leg. I put my hands on the steering wheel and looked at the gear shift to try to figure out which way was go. I stretched my legs out as far as they'd reach and could just get to the gas pedal. I pulled the gear lever down and the car took off with the vampire running as hard as he could to catch me. Wow! If I kept things like this up, I would knock Babyface Nelson off the FBI's 10 most wanted list. That makes me laugh, boys and girls, because we know he's not a vampire. It's not that kind of a book. Okay. But maybe if you were a 10-year-old boy, you might think he was a vampire. Okay, chapter 11. Are you guys... Oh, now that's Lefty Lewis. It's not introduced his name yet, but that man Bud just met is Lefty Lewis. How has Bud been reacting to Lefty Lewis? At first, after the pop, how's he reacting to him now that he found the blood? And what kind of historical information? I don't know if we've got much of that yet. We know that the town of Owasso, Michigan, was not very friendly to black people back then. Okay, chapter 11. The car only went 30 giant steps before it commenced to bucking and finally cut right off. The vampire guy finally caught up with me. He was looking very surprised. He just tapped on the window with his knuckle. He said, "Roll the window down for a minute, Bud." Sometimes it's terrible to have been brought up proper. I couldn't help myself. I rolled the window down just enough so that our words could get in and out, but his hand or claws couldn't. He said, "Okay, what's this?" I said, "Don't you think I can read?" How come you're carrying real human blood around in your car? I showed him my jackknife. I'll warn you, I know how to kill vampires. This knife is genuine, solid 24-karat silver. He put both his hands over his face and shook his head back and forth a couple of times. He said, "Sweet baby Jesus, why me?" Then he said, "Bud, if you were from Flint, I might think you believe that, but you're a Grand Rapids boy. You've got to be smarter than that. If I was a vampire, why have I got that sandwich and a bottle of Red Pop?" I thought for a second. Then the answer jumped out. Bait! He put his hands back over his face. This time, when he pulled them away, he was laughing. He said, "Bud, if I was a vampire, I wouldn't have to catch little boys. I'd just stick my fangs into one of those bottles and have my supper. Besides, where'd you ever hear of a vampire that knew how to drive a car?" That made sense. And all the moving picture shows I'd seen and all the books I'd read about vampires, I never could think of seeing one that could drive a car. But I still wasn't taking any chances. "Could I please see your teeth, sir?" "What?" "Your teeth, sir." The man mumbled something, shook his head again, then leaned close to the window glass and opened his mouth. Even though he didn't have fangs, his teeth still looked kind of scary. They even looked like they could take a pretty good grape-sized fruit chunk out of you. Oh.
Look at all these fish we caught. The blue is still alive.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go back in there for just a minute, Esther.
We're going to cook the
fish. Even though he didn't have fangs, his teeth still looked kind of scary. Are we still going here? Yes, okay. They looked like they could bite a pretty good grapefruit-sized chunk out of you. Then he said, "Bud, I've got to get this blood to Hurley Hospital in Flint. They need it right away for someone's operation. I can look at you and tell you're far too smart to believe in any nonsense like vampires, son. Be a good boy and open the door." I pulled the lock up for him and scooted over to the passenger side of the car. I unlocked my door just in case he had any tricks up his sleeve. He got in the car and said, "You'll never know how grateful I am to you, Bud. I'll take that horrible image of you putting the car in gear to drive away while I stood by the side of the road in Owasso, Michigan at 2:30 in the morning to my grave with me. Thank God you don't know how to drive." "No, sir, but if you'd have showed me some fangs, I'd have learned real quick." Just in case, I watched the way he put the car in gear, so's the next time something like this happened, I'd know how to make a clean getaway. Me and the man headed back toward Flint, driving over the same road it took me so long to walk. Going like this, I wasn't never going to get away from this doggone city. We hadn't been driving for a minute before he started asking a whole slew of questions. Questions that I had to be very careful about giving the right answers to. He said, "Don't you feel bad about worrying your mother like this, Bud Not Buddy?" "My mother's dead, sir." "Most of the times, if you tell an adult that, they'll leave you alone, but not this man." "What? I'm sorry to hear that, Bud. So you stay with your daddy?" "Yes, sir." "Right in Grand Rapids?" "Yes, sir." "What's his name? Does he work for the railroad?" "No, sir." The seed started sticking its head out further and further. "His name is Herman E. Calloway, and he plays the biggest doggone fiddle you'll ever see." The man shouted, "What?" I said, "Really, sir, I swear 'fore God it's the biggest fiddle in the world." He said, "I know your father. Everybody in Grand Rapids does." I didn't say anything. He said, "Well, I'll be. You know, at first glimpse I wouldn't say that you look much like Herman, but now that I look at you, I suppose you do." Of course, he's quite a bit bigger, if you know what I mean. This was the best news I'd had all day. My face nearly split in half from my giant smile. Yes, sir, folks say I'm the spitting image of my old man. He really started shooting the questions at me, so to stop him, I said, Sir, could I please have the sandwich and the rest of the red pop before I answer any more questions? He slapped his forehead and said, Oh, I'm sorry, Bud. I was so surprised about who you are and so happy that you didn't drive off that I forgot all about our deal. He handed me the sandwich and the pop and the apple. I was so hungry that I forgot all about scraping the mustard off the bologna sandwich, and even like that, it was the best sandwich I'd ever had in my life. Bud, he said, my name's Mr. Lewis. Now, if you were about 15, 20 years older, you could call me Lefty, but you're not, so you can't. Mr. Lewis will do just fine. I shoved the part of the sandwich that I was chewing into the side of my mouth so I could say, Yes, sir, Mr. Lewis, sir. He said, I'm not ashamed to admit it. You gave me a scare here tonight that I'll never forget. I just know I'll be having nightmares about meeting you for the rest of my life. I'll wake up in a cold sweat many a night with a picture of you in my car pulling away with that blood on the seat. I can see it all now. I'll be sound asleep, deep in the middle of a Ruth Dandridge dream, when all of a sudden I'll be standing on the side of the road in Owasso, Michigan at 2:30 in the morning, and I'll be seeing my car and that blood pulling away with nothing of you showing but that little peanut head of yours peeking up over the dash. He looked at me out of the side of his eye. Anyone ever tell you you've got a little peanut head? I gulped down the pop I'd been swishing around in my mouth and said, No, sir. Well, he said, this may be the first time, but unless you undergo some major surgery, I'll bet it won't be the last. Yes, sir. He waited a second, then sounded kind of disappointed when he said, Don't take it so seriously, Bud. I'm teasing, you know. I started in on the apple. Yes, sir. Ever been in the army, Bud? No, sir. Well, I've got to tell you, I haven't heard so many sirs since I was back at Fort Gordon in Georgia training for the big war. I almost said, Yes, sir, but I looked up at him and I guessed he was still teasing. I took another drink of the red pop and saw that when I was raising the bottle, I'd accidentally let some of the sandwich slip out of my mouth down into the pop. There were a couple of chunks of chewed up bread, a blob of bologna, and some of the mustard swimming around in the bottle. The mustard was real pretty. It looked like some kind of magical fog. Every time I moved the bottle, the mustardy smoke went into a different kind of shape. Lefty Lewis said, How about sharing some of that pop, Bud? Uh-oh. He took one look and handed it back. He said, Nothing personal, Bud. I've raised 3 kids and have 2 grandkids. I've learned the hard way about drinking after young folks. But I do believe you need to get in and see a doctor soon, son. It looks to me like you've got a serious backwash problem. That's the most food I've ever seen floating around in a bottle of pop. In fact, doesn't look like red pop anymore. Looks more like red stew. I real quick chugged the rest of the pop down and ate the apple real slow, because I figured as soon as I was done with it, questions would start up again. Lefty Lewis said, Aren't you sleepy? This was perfect. I could pretend I was falling asleep and then come up with some big answers that would get me into Grand Rapids for sure. I yawned real big. A little bit, sir. All right, here, give me that core. I think the only thing that's left is a seed or 2 anyway. I handed him the apple core, and he put it in the wax paper from the sandwich in the paper bag. You just stretch out there and have some sleep. In about an hour, you'll be in a nice, comfortable bed. We can have our talk in the morning. He reached in the back seat and said, Here, and handed me a jacket. You can use this for a blanket. The jacket smelled real good, like spice and soap. Lefty Lewis said, Oh, Bud not Buddy, one more thing before you doze off. Could you reach into that box and hand me one of those bottles of blood? I haven't had a bite to eat all day. I kept my eyes closed and smiled. I knew I was going to be safe because I'd never heard of a vampire that could drive a car, and I'd never seen one that had such a good sense of humor. Besides, I kept my jackknife open under my leg, and he looked like he'd believed me when I told him it was made out of real silver, even though it probably wasn't. As soon as I had the jacket over me, the smell of the spice and soap, and the sound of crickets and toady frogs outside made my eyes get real heavy. Wow, I must have been real tired. Walking and ducking in and out of the bushes between Flint and Owasso was a lot more work than I thought it was. Most of the time since Mama died, if someone even walks close to where I'm sleeping, I'm up in a flash. My eyes fly open and I'm looking right at 'em. At one of the foster houses where I'd stayed, a woman told me she knew I was going to be a criminal because anybody who sleeps that light has got to have a guilty conscience. Most of the time, the sound of someone else going from sleep breathing to awake breathing in the same room as me is enough to get me up. But this morning, I felt like I was at the bottom of a well that someone had filled with tons of thick chocolate pudding. Someone was calling my name from way up at the top of the well. She was saying, "Bud, Bud, Bud." Waves from the pudding were slogging me back and forth, back and forth. "Bud, wake up, Bud." It was a woman's voice, and her hands were trying to shake me awake. Uh-oh. This is number 29 of my rules. Rules and things number 29. When you wake up and don't know for sure where you're at, and there's a bunch of people standing around you, it's best to pretend you're still asleep until you can figure out what's going on and what you should do. I kept my eyes closed, acting like I was out cold. The woman said, "Papa, what on earth are all these lumps and bites on this baby's face?" A man answered, "Well, he was walking all the way from Grand Rapids to Flint. It looks like he provided a pretty paltry meal for every mosquito on the way." The woman said, "This poor child must be dead. I hate getting him up. I wish he could stay with us for a while, at least until he's had his sleep." Then I remembered who I was with, because Lefty Lewis said, "I know, but I've got to get back. He can sleep in the car on the way back to Grand Rapids." The woman rolled back the blanket they'd put over me and said, "Papa, look at his legs. This boy's as skinny as a rail." Shucks, they'd taken off my knickers when they put me in this bed. Now I was going to have to pretend to be asleep even longer, at least until I could figure out a way out of being so embarrassed. Lefty Lewis said, "Yeah, he's puny. Good things his legs don't touch when he walks, 'cause if those two twigs got to rubbing against one another, he'd have a fire going in no time." The woman said, "That's not funny. He doesn't look like he's been fed right. Now, who's his father again? You said you know him?" "Everyone in Grand Rapids does. I'm surprised you can't remember him. He's quite a big fish there." "See? I told you it was smart to pretend you were asleep some of the time. Now I was going to learn some things about my father." The woman said, "What kind of man is he that he lets his child be so thin? And look at the condition of the boy's clothes. Everything is either too small for him or almost in tatters. Where is this boy's mother? There's not much of a woman's touch about him." Lefty Lewis says, "It seems to me that the Mrs. Calloway I knew passed a long time ago. The boy says he's 10, and I'm sure she died quite a while before that. But you know how musicians are. There must be at least a few Mrs. Callaways I don't know anything about. That meant my dad was married to someone before he married my mom. Lefty Lewis's daughter said, "Well, I think it's a sin. I'm of half a mind to keep this boy for a while and put some fear in his daddy's heart, but he probably wouldn't even miss him." Lefty Lewis said, "Now you stop being so judgmental. Herman's got a reputation for being no nonsense, not mean. Does this child have any brothers or sisters?" "I believe he's got a sister, but she'd have to be his half-sister. She must be full grown by now." The woman pulled the blanket back over my legs and shook me again. I was glad I could stop pretending I was asleep. I was sick and tired of hearing about how skinny I am and what a mixed-up family I come from. She said real soft, "Bud, wake up. Come on, sweetie. I've got a nice breakfast waiting for you." "Food." I started blinking and acting like those were the first words I'd heard that morning. I said, "Huh?" like I was kind of confused. The woman smiled real big and said, "Oh, I see that got your attention, didn't it?" "Good morning, young man." "Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, Mr. Lewis." He said, "Hey, you remembered my name. I'm impressed." "Good morning, Walking Willie. We've got to hit the road in a bit. Better hurry up and get some food in your belly." He acted like he was whispering just to me when he said, "The food in this joint ain't the best, but I guarantee after you eat here you won't be hungry for days. This meal's going to be sitting on your stomach like a rock for a good long time." The woman said, "Ignore him, Bud. My father doesn't mean anything. He just can't stop teasing." I said, "I know, ma'am. He told me I've got a head shaped like a peanut." The woman slapped her father on the arm. "Papa, I can't believe you've teased this child already. What is on your mind?" Lefty Lewis rubbed his hand over my head and said, "Look at this noggin." I rest my case. "Boy looks like one of George Washington Carver's experiments, sprouted legs and run off." "You sure you're not from Tuskegee, Alabama, Bud?" I said, "No, sir." The woman sucked in her lower lip and swallowed a smile before she said, "See, Bud, he can't help himself. But he really doesn't mean anything, do you, Papa?" The way she asked that, you'd have to be pretty stupid not to know how to answer her. Lefty Lewis said, "Not a thing. It's just that you—" His daughter spoke up. "My name is Mrs. Sleet, Bud." "Pleased to meet you, ma'am." "Now, while you wash up, I'm going to go get some clothes that my boy outgrew a while ago, barely been used. So when you get dressed, you come on down and we'll eat. And you chose a great day to visit. We're having a very special breakfast today. Pancakes, sausages and toast, and a big glass of orange juice. You can meet Scott and Kim, too. How's that sound?" "That sounds real good, ma'am. Thank you very much." "Don't mention it. It's a pleasure to have such a well-mannered young visitor. Ezra, listen, I'm doing a reading, so you no, not right now." Mrs. Sleet and Lefty Lewis left the room. As soon as they were a little bit down the hall, I could hear her start in on scolding her father again. "I just can't believe it. You know Mama was right about you." All I could hear next was him mumbling some answer, then her slapping his arm again. After I got out of the bathroom, I saw that Mrs. Sleet had put some clean clothes on the bed. My old clothes were gone, all except for my drawers, which I hadn't taken off. She even put clean drawers out for me, so when I put them on, I stuck my old ones down in the pocket of my new pants. I could ditch them when I got to Grand Rapids. It's too embarrassing to have strangers look at your dirty drawers, even if the stranger is as nice as Miss Sleet. The new clothes were just a little bit too big, but they were long pants and not knickers, so I didn't care. I rolled cuffs into the pants and sleeves, and they fit pretty doggone good. Man, my first pair of trousers. I let my nose lead me down to where the smell of pancakes and toast was coming from. The Sleets had a room for eating, and it had a great big table right in the middle of it. The first thing I noticed was a huge pile of pancakes sitting on a blue and white plate on top of the table. Lefty Lewis was sitting with Mrs. Sleet's kids. The little girl had a big smile, and the boy was looking at me kind of hard. It wasn't one of those put up your dukes looks. It was just a look like one dog gives another dog that might be passing through his neighborhood. Lefty Lewis said, "Bud, these two worrisome midgets are my favorite grandkids. Kim is my favorite granddaughter, and Scott is my favorite grandson. Of course, they're my only grandkids, so in fairness, you'd have to say they're also my least favorite grandkids." These two kids had had a lot of practice in being around there teasing old Granddad, because they didn't pay him no mind at all. I said, "Hi, my name's Bud, not Buddy." The little girl said, "That's a strange name, Bud, not Buddy." And even though she was kind of young and scrawny to be teasing folks, I could tell that was exactly what she was doing. Lefty Lewis laughed and said, "That's my girl." Then he went into the kitchen. Scott looked up to make sure the grown folks weren't around and said, "You really run away from home?" I had to stop and think. It's one thing to lie to a grown-up. Most times adults want to hear something that lets them take their attention off you and put it off something else. That makes it easy and not too bad to lie to them. You're really just giving them what they want. It's different when you lie to another kid. Most times, kids really do want to know what they're asking you. I guess I'd been thinking about it too long, 'cause he said, "You run all the way from Grand Rapids to Aubuso? Was it 'cause your daddy used to beat you?" I could answer that with the swear-for-God truth. "Shucks, my daddy never laid a hand on me in his life." "Then how come you run?" "I didn't like where I was." That wasn't a lie. "Well, if you're lying about your daddy beating you, you better scram right after breakfast, 'cause my Gramps is taking you straight back home." My daddy never laid a hand on me. The little girl said, "Scott, you talk too much. Let him sit down." Then she told me, "Mama's going to be bringing the sausages in a minute. You like sausages?" "Uh-huh." I'd never had sausages before, but if that was what was making the house smell so good, I was going to love it. Kim said, "Good, 'cause my grandpa brought 'em all the way from Grand Rapids. He always brings us good food, and we're going to share it with you, 'cause Mama says you're our special guest and we have to treat you nice. Am I being nice?" "So far." "Good. I'll make a deal with you." "Uh-oh. What kind of a deal?" "I'll sing a song that I made up all by myself, and when I'm done, I get to ask you one question, and you have to answer, and cross your heart you'll tell the truth." This didn't sound too bad. "Okay. Here goes. It took me a very long time to make this song up, so I hope you like it." The boy says, "Oh, brother." Kim sang, "Mommy says no, Mommy says no. I listen, you don't. Wah, ha, 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 ha. The building falls down, the building falls down. You get crushed, I don't. Wah, ha, ha, ha."
Daddy, Mommy,
That was the worst song I'd ever heard.
Hey, Mommy.
Ezra, I'm reading a
No,
book.
Mommy, I need to tell you something.
Well, tell me in a minute, okay?
But hey, I need to tell you something. I need to want to. Where's your phone?
I'll get it later.
No, get it right now. I need to.
Ezra. Okay. Boy, that was about the worst song I'd ever heard. Kim stood up and bowed like a princess. I clapped my hands together, kind of soft under the table. She said, "Thank you very much." Scott just shook his head. Kim said, "Okay, that's my part of the deal. Now you've got to keep your part and answer any question I ask." "Okay. Now you can tell me all about how your mother died." Scott's foot kicked at her under the table. I said, "Who told you my mama died?" The little girl said, "Oops," and stuffed something from her hand into her mouth. My mama got sick. She died real fast. She didn't feel no pain or no suffering. Kim said, "I hope my mother never dies." Scott said, "Stupid, everybody's got to die." Kim said, "Ooh, I'm telling Mama you called me stupid." He said, "You do, and I'll tell her that you've got one of those pancakes in the pocket of your dress." She shut right up. I told her, "He's right. Everybody's got to die. It's not sad unless they do it real slow and suffer." My mama died so quick and painless that she didn't even have time to close her eyes. She didn't even have time to make a face like she was hurting. Both of Lefty Lewis's grandkids looked real surprised at the news. Mrs. Sleet came into the room with another blue plate covered with little round pieces of meat. Those had to be the sausages. She saw the way her kids were looking at me with their mouths half opened and said, "Now you two aren't talking Bud's ear off, are you?" Scott said, "No, Mama, I'm not, but Kim's coming real close to." Kim said, "I was not. I was just making pleasant conversation." Mrs. Sleet laughed and set the plate on the table right in front of me. Lefty Lewis came out with a big glass jug filled with orange juice and sat down next to me. Mrs. Sleet sat down and said, "Scott and Kim, would you say the grace, please?" Everyone ducked their heads down, and the two kids said, "God is great, God is good. Let us thank Him for our food. Amen." Then people started passing the big blue plates around and stabbing toast and pancakes and sausages with their forks. I watched to see how much everyone took and tried to take the same. Then I started to watch how much food the two kids put on their fork every time, so I wouldn't look like a pig. Lefty Lewis noticed I was taking a long time and told his daughter, "See what I told you, Nina? Poor Bud Not Buddy is so skinny, his stomach has shrunk down so much that just smelling the food has got the boy full." "Oh well, I guess that just means more food for the rest of us." Everyone except for me and Mrs. Sleet yelled out a big cheer. Eating with the Sleets and Lefty Lewis was really hard to do. Not because they had bad table manners or nothing, but because they talked through the whole breakfast. And they kept trying to get me to talk, too. At the home, after grace was said, we weren't allowed to say boo. Eating and being quiet is a hard habit to break. Every time one of these Sleets would talk to me and look at me like they'd expected an answer, I'd look around first to make sure no one was watching. At the home, if you got caught talking during mealtime, you'd have to get up and leave your food. If these Sleets had to live under those rules, they'd all starve to death. They talked after every swallow. They talked after every drink they took. They talked whilst they were wiping off their lips. Shucks, the little girl Kim talked with the milk running down her throat. Some of her words got glugged up in what she was swallowing. And they laughed. Man, did they laugh. It's hard to tell whose story they were laughing at. They were doing so much chattering. Lefty Lewis was talking about radio shows, and Scott was talking about going to a baseball game to watch Lefty Lewis pitch, and Kim was talking about a little girl she didn't like, and Mrs. Sleep was talking about some people called redcaps. Kim said to her, "Mommy, can't you tell that Bud Not Buddy doesn't know what a redcap is? You gotta explain better." Mrs. Sleet said, "Oh, sorry, Bud. Redcaps are the men who work at the railroad station loading the trains and taking people's bags to their cars. That's what Mr. Lewis does. My husband is a Pullman porter. He takes care of the people once they're on the trains." Kim said, "Yeah, our dad gets to travel all over the country on trains for free." Scott said, "That's 'cause he's working. It's not for free. He gets paid to do it." Lefty Lewis swallowed a big hunk of sausage and said, "You know what, Bud? I bet the thing he misses most is Nina's cooking. I can't tell you how proud I am of how far my daughter's cooking has come. This might be hard to believe, but she used to be such a bad cook that her fried chicken was known to have turned a chicken hawk into a vegetarian. Scott and Kim and Mrs. Sleet started busting a gut. Yep, Lefty Lewis said. I brought a friend to Flint a couple of years ago, and even though I'd warned him, he tried to be polite and ate 4 of her pancakes. Poor soul held his stomach all the way back to Grand Rapids. Said to me, Lefty, I don't mean to show any disrespect, but those weren't pancakes your daughter served me. They were pancakes. Mrs. Sleet laughed along with everyone else and said, Well, I'm sure I don't need to hear any more of this, and picked up the empty sausage plate and went into the kitchen. As soon as she got out of the room, Kim whispered, Quick, Grandpa, tell Bud Not Buddy how many times you had to pull the car over when you two were going back to Grand Rapids so that man could get out and vomit on the side of the road. Before Lefty Lewis could answer, Mrs. Sleet came out of the kitchen with a big wooden spoon and whopped her father a good lick in the head. So I hope you boys and girls have gotten lots of information about Lefty Lewis, Bud's reactions to Lefty Lewis and how they change over the course of the chapters, and historical information.